Chapter 24. Here we go. The graveyard gates were 12 feet tall, wet with rain and armed at the top with razor-sharp spikes. Clarissa was up and over them in seconds. A jump, a flip, and a perfect landing on the other side. She grinned at Wildboy between the bars. Bet you can't get through. Wildboy checked again the street was empty, and then tugged off his sack disguise and kicked his clown shoes into a puddle. He brushed back the hair on his face and grinned at Clarissa. Bet I can, he said. Pulling the gate on its chain, he stepped sideways through the gap. Clarissa muttered something about cheating, but he pretended not to hear as he peered through the misty moonlight at St. Mary's Somerset Church. The building, once perhaps beautiful, was now almost completely blackened by grime. The only signs of its original colour were 4 pinnacles of white stone that rose from the top of the tower like skeleton fingers reaching into the night. Clarissa peered warily around the dark graveyard. Do you think the killer's here? Wildboy crouched and examined the gravel path that led to the church. He couldn't see any signs of footprints or other clues to suggest anyone had been here since it had last rained, but he was sure this church was important. He brought the doctor's notebook from his pocket and reread the words from the torn-out page. The machine burned Mary Somerset. The machine, what changes you? He said. What? Clarissa said. Nothing. Clarissa trudged to a wooden hut off the path, unlocked the door with her picks, and stole a lantern she saw inside. She struck the flint and handed Wildboy with the light. Now that she'd led them here, she was happy to let him take charge. So what are we looking for? Wildboy wished he had an answer. His big eyes searched the outside of the church for clues to make sense of the words in the doctor's book. The building was derelict, but it didn't look like it had suffered any fires recently, nor did any of these gravestones, or the... He closed his eyes and groaned. What an idiot he'd been. Of course, he said, the graves. The middle word in the book wasn't burned, it was buried. We got to check them graves, he said. They set off through the graveyard that ran along the side of the church. Mouldering headstones rose at odd angles from long, straggly grass. Wildboy's lantern cast a shaky glow over icy-covered headstones, broken-faced angels, and sacred promises carved in stone. We will never forget you. I will fear no evil. I will rise again. He had never been in a graveyard before, and he didn't like it. He thought he saw something move behind one of the stone tombs. He turned, but there was no one there. Just the wind rustling the long grass. Over here, Clarissa called. He rushed to where she stood beneath the sprawling arms of a yew tree. The grass here reached halfway up his legs, and the headstones, small and cheaply cut, were stained with patches of glistening slime. Wildboy held the lantern over one of the graves. At the top of the headstone, he could just see a faint letter scratched beneath the mould. Another G, Clarissa said. It's them again, the gentlemen. Wildboy rubbed away a patch of the mould to reveal the name on the headstone. Thomas Weems. Never heard of him, Clarissa said. Yeah, you have, Wildboy thought. She just didn't remember. He opened the doctor's notebook and flicked to the page. Here, this is him. Prisoner Thomas Weems, a dismal trial upon this subject who lasted not 5 seconds under the machine's full charge. His heart began to beat faster. Not fear this time, but excitement. Let's check these other graves, he said. They ran through the long grass, inspecting names on the stones under the yew. Rook, Clarissa said. This one says Clarence Rook. That name's in a doctor's book, ain't it? This town's got a G on it and all. And these two, Wildboy said, Doyle and Mayhew. He crouched to examine another grave, but Clarissa closed the shutter on the lantern. There's a carriage, she whispered. Wildboy followed her gaze towards the street. The carriage was big and black, with a golden emblem on the door. Its light rippled a crimson glow across puddles as it rattled closer. It was slowing down. We should hide, Clarissa said. They rushed behind the trunk of the yew and watched the carriage come to a stop outside the gates. Wildboy could now see the emblem on the door. It was a golden letter G. The door opened and 4 men emerged, dressed in frock coats and stovepipe hats. As the tallest man stepped into the lamplight, a glint of gold shone from under the shadow of his hat. "That's him," Wild Boy said. "That's the Golden-Eyed Man." The other men slid a long wooden crate from inside the carriage. Grunting with effort, they carried it towards the gates. The Golden-Eyed Man unlocked the gates. "Hurry, gentlemen," he said. Wild Boy and Clarissa huddled together, barely daring to breathe, as 2 of them carried the crate past the yew tree. The Golden-Eyed Man followed, one hand leaning on his cane, the other raising a lantern against the dark. Then he stopped, just yards from the yew tree. His one good eye narrowed as it scanned the graveyard. He gripped the top of his cane and swish, drew a long steel blade from inside. Wild Boy's hands clenched into fist. He and Clarissa had made it this far, and he wasn't going to let this man catch them now. Not now. The Golden-Eyed Man stepped towards the tree. Clarissa gripped Wild Boy's arm. She was shaking, but he could see in her eyes that she too was ready to fight. The Golden-Eyed Man came closer. "Sir," a voice called. The third man ran along the path from the gates, clutching something he'd found. He opened his mouth to speak, but the Golden-Eyed Man silenced him with a look. "May I remind you, Mr. Beauchamp, that we are a secret organisation." "Sir," the other man said, "perhaps you might lower your voice." "I'm sorry, sir. I found this." Wild Boy could see what the man held. It was the sack that Clarissa had made him as a disguise. The Golden-Eyed Man slid his sword back into his cane. He held the sack to his lantern and stood at its jack-o'-lantern face and charcoal writing. Just for a second he seemed to wince. Wild Boy remembered the agony he'd seen the man in at the fair and the relieving liquid he kept in his false eye. But the man stopped himself from reaching for it. His jaw clenched, and he handed the sack back to his companion. "It is the boy." "Impossible, sir." "It is the boy. He was not alone." "The circus girl?" "Presumably." The Gold-Eyed Man was silent for a moment. "We have underestimated these 2, he said finally. "Perhaps quite seriously." "Sir, this is grave news. Those 2 learn about—" "I am aware of the gravity of our situation, Mr. Beauchamp. That is why I wish you to stop speaking. There remains a killer on the loose, and I can assure you that it is neither Wild Boy nor Clarissa Everett. Whoever it is, he is after the machine, and that means he is after us. But for now, this crate remains our priority." He moved away from the yew towards the church, where he unlocked the doors and pushed them open. He followed his companions as they carried the crate inside. "We shall take care of the children later," he said. The doors closed with a hollow thud. Immediately, Wild Boy burst from behind the tree and ran for the church, weaving between headstones and tangles of bramble. That man had said he had the machine. Wild Boy had to know if it was real, if there really was a machine that could change how he looked. But as he neared the doors, another thud echoed around the graveyard. It came from the church. The blackened walls had begun to shake, and then a louder noise echoed from inside. Rattling chains and a deep, grinding sound like stone scraping against stone. The glass rattled in the broken windows, and then silence. "What just happened?" Clarissa said, catching up. Wild Boy had no idea. but he was desperate to find out. He looked to a large broken window about 30 feet high. "Can you get up there to see?" Clarissa hesitated, touching the bruise on her face, but she nodded and began to climb. Wild Boy barely saw how she managed it. She was up in seconds, clinging to the window ledge and peeking through one of the remaining stained glass panels. "What can you see?" Wild Boy asked. "Wait there," she replied. She climbed higher, and then, in one quick move, she swung feet first through the empty part of the window. "Clarissa!" Wild Boy called. He didn't hear her land. The only sounds were the cracking of a crow high on the tower and the whistle of wind through the broke window. And then the door creaked slowly open. Wild Boy staggered back, fist trembling. But it was just Clarissa. The sequins on her dress shone red and gold in the light from inside the church. "You won't believe this," she said. Cautiously, Wild Boy stepped through the door, his brushed hair away from his eyes, and stared. A fallen statue of an angel lay shattered across the aisle between rows of wooden pews. Above it, a candle flickered on a stand, its light glimmering off a bronze cross that stood in the centre of the altar. But otherwise, the church was empty. The men had vanished.